Heroes are great and all, but come on, what really turns an MCU movie from good to great is a fantastic villain at its center. And although the MCU has been going for over a decade now, there's still a ton of villains the franchise needs to introduce. All these bad guys on today's list could cause serious trouble for Earth's mightiest heroes and completely change everything, don't you think?
Oh boy.
I mean, when will we see Magneto?
My brothers.
Will Thunderbolt Ross ever become Red Hulk?
Don't worry about me.
Is Moreland the next big Spidey villain? Let's get into it right now.
Whoa.
I think out of any villain yet to be introduced, the biggest one, almost literally, that fans want has to be Galactus. The giant purple planet eater is a major threat in the comics, and honestly, it's a little weird we haven't heard any mention of him so far. Like, he's definitely out there, right? Maybe the MCU is trying to figure out how exactly to fit the giant cosmic entity into their overall story, because the simple explanation would be to just make him a celestial. They did that with Ego, the living planet, after all, but huge Galactus fans, or Galactheads as I like to call ourselves, know that he's actually a remnant of the previous universe that carried over, so he's technically even older and more powerful than the Celestials. Maybe the MCU will have him be the big threat to the Celestials, and Earth helping stop him will convince the Celestials to not crack us open like an egg? One of the most important non-cosmic villains that need to show up in the MCU is Doctor Doom. And yes, I mean actually Doctor Doom. The previous Fox versions of the character made the baffling decision to not adapt the character properly, not just once, but twice. Like, is it so hard to have a supreme leader of Latveria be a big threat to our heroes? But to be fair, both of the previous versions had the difficult task of providing an origin story for the Fantastic Four, and there wasn't time to introduce a Victor Von Doom that wasn't tied directly to Marvel's first family. But the MCU is a massive place now. You could easily introduce Doctor Doom in something like Black Panther 2 and have Latveria battle Atlantis and Wakanda in a power struggle, and then have the Fantastic Four fight him in their own movie. That would work, right? Just please, MCU, get him right this time.
Trespassing on Latverian soil.
Honestly, I didn't care that much about Mephisto until WandaVision.
Where is he?
And then, when Marvel's Devil didn't actually show up after weeks of hints and constant online speculating, I was majorly disappointed.
Boner.
And at this point, the MCU's just teasing us, right? Like, when the No Way Home trailer first came out, there was that huge shot of a poster saying Peter was the devil in disguise, which was a reference to how this specific comic storyline originally featured Mephisto as the one that erased everyone's memory. I mean, people even thought that Doctor Strange was actually Mephisto in disguise, but the devil still hasn't made an appearance. Where's he at? After all the fan theories, he has to face Wanda at some point, right? With Adam Warlock officially entering the MCU in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, we're all left wondering just what type of character he's going to be. In the comics, Adam's greatest comic arc is tied with the Infinity Gauntlet and Thanos, but he wasn't around yet in the MCU to be a big player in Infinity War or Endgame. So what happens now? Well, in the comics, Adam Warlock has an evil side thanks to a split personality known as Magus, who's incredibly dangerous. I sense a strong thematic parallel between the Guardians trying to befriend Adam while fighting the evil version of him, while also trying to find a different version of Gamora to bring her back on the team. I think it makes sense.
Gamora.
As much as we all want the mutants and the X-Men to be introduced in the MCU, that also means all the mutants' villains will also be free to roam around and cause havoc. That's a scary thought because a lot of them are just devastating. Take Onslaught, for instance. Onslaught is an Avengers movie type of threat. His story has been switched up a few times, but his big one is that he's the sentient psionic entity created from the consciousness of Charles Xavier and Magneto. The amount of damage this villain can do should terrify any hero, and maybe the creation of Onslaught down the line will be the catalyst for the X-Men and the Avengers to team up? Maybe. So Galactus and Doctor Doom are big Fantastic Four villains, but they're not first movie villains, you know what I mean? We know a Fantastic Four movie is coming, so who's a big enough threat for Marvel's first family to face? Why not Annihilus? The baddie is the ruler of the Negative Zone, which in the Ultimate Comic universe is what gave the Fantastic Four their powers. So a movie with the Negative Zone at its center would be perfect for Annihilus.
A spot in this wretched universe.
He's your classic, let's take over everything so I can live longer type of villain, and he even comes with his own MacGuffin in the Cosmic Control Rod. If I was a betting man, I'd bet Annihilus will face the Fantastic Four sooner rather than later in the MCU. What would Magneto be like in the MCU? You really can't have mutants and the X-Men without the Master of Metal, but also you have to follow in the footsteps of two near-perfect performances. As wonky as the Fox X-Men movies could get, both Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender brought gravitas, charm, and tragedy to their portrayals of Magneto, where anyone else has huge shoes to fill. Plus, how do you bring in Magneto in today's MCU? The core of Magneto's character has always been how he's a Holocaust survivor. But now that it's like the 2020s in the MCU, that age issue means a big change might have to happen, right? Unless, of course, they make it where it's the 1980s or 90s in whatever universe the X-Men come from? That sounds fun. The Hulk's rage-fueled personality has been seriously neutered in the MCU lately, and honestly, it's just not as fun. I want the angry Hulk to smash things again. That's why bringing in a character like Maestro would be the shot in the arm the character needs right now. Maestro is an alternate future version of the Hulk who rules over the apocalyptic wasteland that once was Earth, and thanks to a nuclear war, the villain is even stronger and more intelligent than normal Hulk. I think the next big Avengers movie should be an adaptation of Secret Wars, which means bringing in the Beyonder to the MCU. The Beyonder is one of the most powerful beings in the entire universe and has always been fascinated with humanity and their beliefs about reality. That's the setup for Secret Wars, which sees the uber-powerful being transport a lot of heroes and villains to a place called Battle World so they could fight it out for the Beyonder's enjoyment. So there's a relatively new villain in Marvel Comics, but it's actually a familiar hero. Let me explain. There's a version of Gamora out there who eliminated Thanos herself and set off on her own quest to get the Infinity Stones, taking on the mantle known as Requiem. This villain version of the character could technically be adapted into the MCU with the upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Maybe 2014 Gamora has spent her time on her own doing assassin-like things with the Requiem moniker, and it's up to the Guardians to bring her back to the side of good. Well, to the side of kinda good, right? What if there was a villain with all of the Fantastic Four's powers? Well, you're in luck. There is one. Super Skrull is a Skrull warrior created by the Skrull Empire because they were pretty angry at the Fantastic Four for thwarting one of their invasion plans. And so their solution was to create a fighter that could do everything the Fantastic Four could do, except better. I really like the idea of the Fantastic Four facing one villain with all their powers because it would highlight that sometimes teamwork and strategy is better than just being on your own. So bring on Super Skrull. Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross has been in the MCU since basically the beginning now, and yet we still haven't seen him transform into Red Hulk. What gives? Come on, if they're bringing Abomination back for a sizable Phase 4 arc, then the least they could do is give us some Red Hulk action. I want the Hulk to face one last great threat in the MCU, and seeing him trade blows with Red Hulk would be a fight more than a decade in the making. Look, the Fox X-Men movies are really hit and miss, and unfortunately, X-Men Apocalypse was a big miss. They ruined one of Marvel's best evil mutants, and hopefully the MCU can bring a better version of Apocalypse to the big screen. Alright, I just want to keep the mutant train going for a second. Mr. Sinister, just a great name by the way, had a lot of references in the Fox X-Men movies, but that now will never pay off. So it's time to bring Nathaniel Essex into the MCU. Thanks to genetic engineering, Essex became an ageless, chalky white, vampire-esque character obsessed with creating a perfect species of superhumans. Of course, genetic engineering makes him a prime villain for the mutants and the X-Men, and it's a villain that would work well in the MCU. Yeah, ever since No Way Home, I've just been thinking about ways that we can reunite the 3 Spider-Men again. And that's where Morlun comes into play. Morlun was the main villain in the comic Spider-Verse storyline, where the vampiric being traveled across the multiverse, devouring every Spider-Man and Peter Parker he could get his hands on. If the MCU wanted to make a faithful live-action Spider-Verse film, then Morlun is the villain to make it happen. Cyclops is a character who never got the spotlight he deserved in the X-Men films. Making him the third wheel to the Wolverine and Jean Grey love story really set the character back, and while Wolverine became the face of the franchise in live action, comic readers know Cyclops is a much bigger deal than the movies made him out to be. Which is why when the X-Men are brought into the MCU, that Scott Summers should be the new center of the group, not Wolverine. You can do this by forming most stories around Scott, like the introduction of Vulcan, Scott's other brother who's an Omega-level mutant that can control vast amounts of energy. Yeah, he could be bad news and a worthy adversary for the X-Men in a way that puts Scott Summers front and center. With Daredevil and Kingpin back in the MCU, it's only a matter of time before we see other Daredevil allies and villains pop up. The one I'm most excited for is Bullseye. One of Daredevil's best villains, the guy who can hit anything with just about anything, can challenge Daredevil in unique and interesting ways. But the big question is, do you bring in the version of the character who just had an origin story in the Daredevil TV show, or do you reboot the character for the MCU? That's actually a really tough question because both options are plausible and could work. Alright, this one technically might break the rules because Leader did appear in the MCU, but just not on screen. Samuel Stearns had a head wound that got infected with Hulk blood in The Incredible Hulk, which was a tease for the character to become the villain known as the Leader in a later movie. Of course, that didn't happen, but a tie-in comic centered around Black Widow shows that right after Stearns is infected, he wakes up to find his intelligence amplified to extreme levels. Natasha then swoops in and promptly arrests him. Thor's new journey, where he basically wants to travel around and have space adventures to reignite his passion for life, means he's going to come across some wild characters and villains. That's where Amatsu Mikaboshi, aka the Chaos King, comes into play. The Chaos King is the god of evil and chaos, if you couldn't guess, and is honestly downright terrifying in appearance. This would be a new type of villain for Thor to face, and I would love this new comical version of Thor to go up against such a demented evil in one of his solo movies, wouldn't you? Let's stick to Thor villains for a second. So Thor is the Asgardian god of thunder, and I've long held the belief that future Thor movies should see Thor interact with other gods in the universe. So yes, that means the MCU should introduce Thor to the Greek gods, which includes the god of war Ares. Yes, Ares has already been the main villain of the Wonder Woman film, so chances of seeing him in the MCU are slim. But I think there's a way to introduce Ares and the other Greek gods in a way that stands apart from what the DCEU has done. Okay, one last Thor villain, I promise. Mangog is the physical manifestation of the hatred of a billion beings from a race that was slaughtered by Odin long ago. In the comics, this beast is imprisoned in Asgard, and since the MCU has now reduced Asgard to space dust, maybe a part of Thor 4 could center around Thor gathering up the creatures that have now escaped out into the cosmos. That would be a fun way to continue Thor's new character arc, with him establishing a new legacy of cleaning up Asgard's past misdeeds. With the Armor Wars series coming up, it's the perfect time to introduce Crimson Dynamo, basically the Russian Iron Man. Introducing Crimson Dynamo to Armor Wars means you could probably include Red Guardian somehow, which is a great idea because the fan favorite character doesn't have a return set yet after his scene-stealing turn in Black Widow. Okay, this last one I just picked for the name, Tiger Shark. Come on, he's a giant shark humanoid creature that's basically the MCU's version of King Shark from DC Comics. He's naturally an enemy of Namor, and with the Submariner playing a role in Black Panther 2, I'm holding out hope for an appearance of Tiger Shark. You can never have enough giant shark humanoid creatures in your life, don't you think?
Look around you.
What a time we're in. We get to talk about why the heck we haven't seen a fictional demon appear in the same movie as Hawkeye yet.
Who's that guy?
With many more projects to come and heroes to introduce, so come their opponents.
I'm not supposed to say anything to you.
The MCU is nothing without its villains. Sure, the heroes take the spotlight, but the MCU villains often come right from the pages of the comics. Upcoming projects are certainly hinting towards the arrival of some fan favorites, but we are definitely waiting for quite a few villains to appear. From cosmic entities to older men who retired and chose hunting instead of golf as their next hobby, the villain population of the MCU is going to get a whole lot bigger. Let's take a look at some of the villains we are still waiting to appear in the MCU right now.
What the hell was that?
Perhaps the largest glaring hole in the MCU in terms of villains goes will definitely be here soon, given that a certain studio purchase means he can play with his friends again. Dr. Doom is commonly thought of as one of the smartest and most imposing villains in all of Marvel Comics.
You dare trespass on Latverian soil?
The ruler of his own country, Latveria, Dr. Doom's intelligence rivals that of Reed Richards, the leader of his greatest enemies, the Fantastic Four.
That's what I'm talking about.
With the Fantastic Four movie set to release as the first film in Phase 6, it's unknown if he will be used, or if they will save a possible Avengers-level threat for later, and have Marvel's first family battle Mole Man or something. However, with the announcement of Avengers Secret Wars, of which Victor Von Doom plays a paramount role in the comics, the pattern points to the Latverian leader's arrival into the MCU sooner rather than later. What's the old expression? Third time's the charm? Despite all of the fan theories, this next guy has not yet appeared in the MCU either. As WandaVision was premiering, everyone and their mother's mother would have bet all their allowance that Mephisto would be revealed to be the large villain controlling everything.
I can't fix it.
However, that would prove to be false, as we learned it was Agatha all along. Marvel's version of the literal devil obviously poses a serious threat to any hero, villain, or anti-hero. The ruler of the underworld and an all-powerful demon, Mephisto has taken part in several popular comic storylines, including Thanos' original search for the Infinity Stones. Mephisto is tricky and responsible for cursing some characters, including the Ghost Rider. His power of the deal has royally screwed over the lives of millions of people throughout time. And with the dark reaches of the universe the MCU is reaching, such as references to the demon Chthon and the eventual introduction of vampires, who's to say Mephisto isn't right around the corner? I mean, I'm not gonna make any theories again because I've already been burned once. The Master of Magnetism has been featured in several live-action and animated properties.
As I have always dreamed.
Magneto existed for quite a while as part of the Fox X-Men universe, even being portrayed by multiple actors. However, we have all been waiting for mutants and the X-Men to be introduced in the MCU, and the hints keep getting bigger and bigger. With the short-lived portrayal of Professor X and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness by Patrick Stewart, Disney has showed us that they are definitely not afraid to start tapping in the X-Men. With them has to come some of their most powerful villains. Now, Patrick Stewart portrayed Professor X in another universe, which means the main 616 timeline could see a whole new roster of X-Men arrive. And with the X-Men comes Magneto. Magneto is one of the most underratedly powerful villains to exist, and could serve as a prominent character, perhaps with the cloud of Loki in future MCU projects to come. Some of the best villains are alter egos of the best heroes.
It's true.
It makes fighting them extremely difficult for Marvel's most honorable. Take the Hulk, for example. Heroes definitely need to stop the threat, but don't want to permanently hurt their friend. This is extremely true for the hero Adam Warlock, and he's not the only one. Adam Warlock has an extremely powerful and villainous alter ego known as the Magus, responsible for some of the greatest destruction and carnage in the comics. The surprise for this one really comes from the fact that it took this long to be introduced to Adam Warlock, who will officially debut in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and has had a close nemesis in Thanos, who is likely gone before Adam even arrives. Now with his official entrance, it probably won't be long before the Magus rears his ugly head. Another character with a villainous alter ego is Robbie Reynolds, aka the Sentry, affectionately known as the Superman of Marvel. There hasn't even been a whisper about this guy appearing in the MCU, which to me is still a shock. It's probably good too, because with the Sentry comes his uncontrollable alter ego known as the Void. The Void is nearly unstoppable, and people have gone back in time and tried to kill Robbie as a child to try and stop the coming of the Void in the future. With nearly unstoppable power, when the Void takes over, he leaves a wake of destruction everywhere he goes. Why do all the most powerful heroes have alter egos? Adam Warlock, Bruce Banner, the Sentry. Why can't we get an evil Hawkeye every now and then? Kang the Conqueror has already made his appearance in the MCU as He Who Remains in the finale of Season 1 of Loki. However, Kang is somewhat of an enigma, and He Who Remains is one of an infinite number of versions of this incredible villain. The true form of Kang will likely be the big bad of the Kang dynasty.
Nice nose, thanks, man.
And has already likely taken over the TVA at the end of the Disney Plus series. However, several other versions of this villain still exist, and you better believe some of them rank up there as almost as bad. Certain versions that come to mind include the Scarlet Centurion, an axe-wielding warrior, and Rama Tut, an ancient Egyptian ruler who came from the future and conquered this era of history with his futuristic technology. Any of these alternate versions could appear in any MCU projects coming up, and the best part is, unless you're a hardcore comic nerd, you may not even know who they truly are. Some of the greatest villains rule their own dimensions, and they are so powerful that the best heroes can do is try to make sure they stay where they are, not spill over into their own universes. Annihilus rules over the negative zone and is the leader of a bug-like race. He seeks to destroy anyone who would threaten his existence, and has been able to take possession of such powerful weapons like the Control Rod. Annihilus constantly seeks to extend his own lifespan, and has been responsible for waging some of the most casualty-heavy wars against Marvel heroes. Several pocket dimensions have already been introduced, such as the village of Ta Lo, and the negative zone is often associated with giving the Fantastic Four their powers. Annihilus, or at least his hometown, could be coming to the MCU very soon. The X-Men bring with them not only a large assortment of heroes, but villains as well. One of the most powerful who has not yet been featured in any live-action film or series is a character known as Onslaught. Two of the most synonymous mutants are Professor X and Magneto. Constantly at odds with how to achieve mutant freedom, the two have done battle for ages. At one point, Professor X had had enough and shut down Eric's consciousness. This caused the two psionic entities of these two powerful characters to merge into one new physical manifestation known as Onslaught. I'm not so surprised that we haven't seen Onslaught in the MCU yet, but more so that we haven't seen him at all, given his incredibly unique and powerful origin and just how sick he looks. Another villain who we have seen attempted unsuccessfully multiple times in live action is the Dark Phoenix. Jean Grey is a leading member of the X-Men who famously in the comics gets overtaken by a cosmic entity known as the Phoenix Force, and transforms into one of the most powerful villains in the universe, the Dark Phoenix. This storyline has been attempted twice in X-Men The Last Stand and X-Men Dark Phoenix, and has pretty much fully failed both times. As already discussed, I believe it's only a matter of time before the X-Men enter the MCU, making way for Disney to finally try and get the story of the Dark Phoenix right. Not only does this introduce a powerful villain, but also a cosmic power that could inhabit any character. The Scarlet Witch may have destroyed the Darkhold in every universe, and the Tower of Wundagore, thus eliminating the dark magic written by the demon Chthon in all its forms. However, I'm skeptical. I think the Scarlet Witch may still be alive, and I don't think we've seen the last of this kind of chaos magic. Chthon was the first demon, and while he may have been name-dropped, he's never actually appeared in the MCU. Chthon may have predicted the coming of the Scarlet Witch, who is one of the most powerful MCU villains to date, but he could be a whole other beast. Good thing Doctor Strange has 3 eyes now, I guess? Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings introduced us to the world of dragons. Heck, this next villain appeared on a billboard way back in the first Iron Man. Fin Fang Foom is a member of the McLuhan race, an alien species who greatly resemble dragons. Most associated with the Mandarin, Fin Fang Foom is one of the most evil McLuhans and is associated with the creation of the Ten Rings. The Great Protector, who helped Shang-Chi defend Ta Lo, is likely a member of this race, and it's possible the beacon that the Ten Rings sent out could be calling to the famed evil dragon. If Fin Fang Foom truly is on his way, Shang-Chi is going to need a little bit of help taking down this next giant monster, capable of wiping out villages and other dimensions in his sleep. Thanks to one film, Spider-Man shot into first place in terms of how many Rogues Gallery villains have appeared in the MCU. When Peter broke Doctor Strange's spell, several villains from alternate universes began making their way to Earth 616. The outline of a villain we have never seen in live action nearly made his way in before Peter saved the day. Kraven the Hunter is one of the most long-running and interesting villains who we are dying to see. He will be getting his own film in the Sonyverse.
I don't know.
Kraven could be a perfect villain for a future Spider-Man solo film, especially now without any technological resources he is used to. Another Spider-Man villain who may have already appeared, but not really, is the Hobgoblin. Modeled heavily after the Green Goblin, the Hobgoblin is a destructive and deranged villain who often poses a serious threat to the Wallcrawler. The reason we're surprised we haven't seen him yet is because of one of his alter egos, who held the mantle. Ned Leeds is Peter's best friend in the MCU, but in the comics he has been a recipient of the Goblin formula that transformed him into the Hobgoblin. With actor Jacob Batalon getting rather jacked, theories were abound. though he did not wind up making the transformation in No Way Home. However, now that he doesn't remember Peter and has seen Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin for inspiration, Ned's one lab accident away from trying to kill his best friend. If you thought Mephisto was the only theory gone wrong when it comes to WandaVision, you would be sorely mistaken. Especially with all the talk of dreamwalking in the MCU as of late, I am incredibly surprised that we haven't at least gotten the hint at the villain Nightmare yet. Nightmare literally lives in the dream dimension and is obsessed with causing fear in his opponents. Nightmare has teamed with several Marvel villains and faced off against several popular Marvel heroes. Given that projects like WandaVision, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and even Moon Knight deal with spiritual planes and other dimensions, I'd like to think Nightmare, the Lord of Dreams, will be appearing sooner rather than later. Nathaniel Essex was a Victorian-era geneticist who predicted the arrival of mutants in the future. His intellect caught the attention of the first mutant, Apocalypse, who genetically mutated Nathaniel, turning him into the powerful and brilliant villain, Mr. Sinister. Over the years, Mr. Sinister continued experimenting with mutant genetics, adding to his power and becoming nearly unstoppable, even able to break away from his creator, Apocalypse. Mr. Sinister is an X-Men villain who is not often thought of, and could be one of the first villains they face when they join the MCU. The original catalyst for Marvel's Infinity War may have been left out of the movie adaptation, but that doesn't mean we couldn't still see her appear in the MCU. The original motivation of Thanos' Infinity Quest was to impress the living embodiment of death. Lady Death obviously represents some horrific consequences for trillions of people in the universe, and her manipulation of Thanos caused untold horror, with universal embodiments such as Eternity and the Watcher beginning to appear in the MCU. We could definitely see Lady Death pulling someone's strings very soon. Perhaps another villain will fall in love with her and try to destroy half the universe for her honor. One of the most powerful races of beings in the entire multiverse of Marvel Comics is the Beyonders. The first of these beings introduced as a villain in the very first Secret Wars was simply known as the Beyonder. These beings have the ability to completely warp reality at will. They are essentially gods capable of using heroes as playthings. The original Beyonder brought all of Marvel's heroes and all of Marvel's villains to one world called Battle World for the war to commence. He can create matter, make characters do anything, build and destroy planets, and quite literally bring an end to just about everything. And with Avengers Secret Wars announced, I am surprised we have not gotten some hints to this unbelievably powerful villain. One example of the Beyonder's power is another villain who has yet to appear, known as Molecule Man. In the Earth 616 timeline, a man by the name of Owen Reese was chosen by the Beyonders to be the Molecule Man of that universe. The Molecule Man possessed a small fraction of the Beyonders' power, which is still unbelievably outpacing just about any other known power, and was made to be a sort of bomb as a failsafe to destroy the universe, meaning that the Beyonders created a Molecule Man in every single one. Overall, the Molecule Man has taken part in fights against the Fantastic Four and popular comic stories such as Secret Wars. If we can't get the Beyonders right away, Molecule Man would be a nice little hint. One of the most powerful beings ever to oppose all of Marvel's heroes and some of its villains is the cosmic being known as Galactus. Having appeared in cloud form in Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, Galactus has yet to appear in any sort of way that could be considered comic accurate. He is better known as the Devourer of Worlds, and can only be stopped when literally every character in the universe joins forces to ruin his plan of feasting on their homeworld. I'm not sure we will be seeing him very soon, given the amount of Avengers-level threats that seem to be adding up in the coming phases, which just builds up the anticipation for the long-awaited arrival of this fan-favorite villain.
The MCU continues to give us amazing villain after amazing villain, and it set a high bar for whoever decides to show up and cause chaos for our heroes next. But what are some powerful MCU villains we haven't seen yet? Sure, this list is going to mention the big ones like Doctor Doom and Galactus, but stick around and I'll throw in some other insanely strong and interesting villains that I think need a live-action introduction. I'll be breaking down where we could see these villains pop up and what heroes they could fight. Ready? Let's get started right now. Whenever there's a list of powerful villains we all want to see in the MCU, Doctor Doom is usually at the top, and there's a reason for that.
Now,
Even though he doesn't actually have a PhD, Doctor Doom is one of the most popular Marvel villains ever, and the fact that we've had 2 live-action attempts that have both completely floundered has only made us more impatient for a version of the Latvian dictator to show up in the MCU. There's just something so interesting about the guy. He's like an evil blend of both Tony Stark and Stephen Strange, which is such a dangerous combination. He's a brilliant inventor and has a genius intellect, but he also isn't afraid to dabble in the mystic arts from time to time. So we haven't seen him yet in the MCU, and the question becomes just where should he pop up first? The obvious answer would be in a Fantastic Four movie, since he is primarily known as being their greatest antagonist, but I just don't think that works. Probably the better option is that he's an antagonist in a Black Panther movie first, as the idea of Latveria and Wakanda at war with each other would make an excellent basis for a movie. But also, again, Doom can work anywhere. I mean, there's one storyline where he has to reluctantly team up and work with Kang the Conqueror, so imagine if the MCU goes that route.
Trespassing on Latvian soil.
Galactus is the very definition of power. Anyone who can put eats planets on a resume definitely should not be underestimated. And we haven't seen Galactus yet in the MCU, but arguably behind Doctor Doom, the Devourer of Worlds is someone who needs to be included in the MCU eventually. So the question I'll ask, like everyone on this list, is where should he show up? Yes, also like Doom, he's traditionally a Fantastic Four villain, but since his debut, he's morphed into an everyone threat and is one of the most important cosmic characters. Maybe the best method would be to tease him in a Fantastic Four movie and then set him up to be the big bad for everyone going forward. Not only would that create some awesome stories, but it would also position the new Fantastic Four as vital to this next big phase, which is great for us in the long run. The question is, do you think he'll keep his backstory? With the way the MCU adapts things, like making Ego the living planet a celestial, I've often thought that they'll just make Galactus another celestial for ease, but I hope not. Maybe you can introduce him in the next Eternals movie as the threat that the Celestials are all scared of?
My power is limitless.
You have to wonder what the MCU thought when the whole Mephisto backlash started in WandaVision. WandaVision was the first MCU show, so the studio got to see how audiences would react to teases and Easter eggs, and watch us all work each other up in a frenzy with our wild theories.
Boner.
There's no way they could have predicted the internet would be so adamant that Mephisto was going to show up, right? But I mean, it's their fault there were so many teases. But the fact that Marvel's Devil did not end up making an appearance has now created the running joke about how Mephisto is going to show up everywhere. But what's going to happen when he actually does? The funniest thing ever would be if he shows up in a completely random place we never expect. Like, what if he randomly shows up in Miss Marvel? Our jaws would drop. The great thing about Mephisto is that he can work in just about any MCU movie, as he can appear to our heroes and grant them their deepest wishes at a severe cost. But if I had to pick one hero who would be most visually interesting to fight, it would have to be Doctor Strange at this point. Doctor Strange's battle with Mephisto in a later movie could open the door to more supernatural elements and pave the way for heroes like Ghost Rider. If the MCU is ever able to coax Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield back for another Spidey team-up movie, then there would need to be a solid reason for all of them to meet up again.
I hope it's okay. I just came through this,
I mean, sure, I guess you don't need a great reason, as we as an audience would probably watch any story with the three of them. Like, who needs world-ending threats when you could have a whole movie about Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker finally healing enough to marry his version of MJ, and he invites the 2 other Peters to be his groomsmen. Wacky wedding shenanigans would ensue. Come on, tell me you wouldn't watch that movie. Anyways, if they need an actual threat to fight, then Morlun would be the perfect one to reunite them. He's the main villain in the Spider-Verse comic series, and he jumps around different universes sucking the life force from all the spider totems. Yes, it would be a little similar to the animated Spider-Verse movies, but if it was a chance to see all 3 Peters hang out again, I think we would all be okay with it, right? Both can exist. That's the beauty of the multiverse. Whenever the X-Men make their grand introduction, they're going to need a powerful villain to fight. Yeah, sure, they could go the Magneto route again, but I'm hoping they bring in a baddie we haven't ever seen in live action, but has been teased a few times. Mr. Sinister is a master of both genetic engineering and rocking fancy capes. 2 very important things in my book.
I was right.
He's a powerful villain that acts as a perfect foil for the X-Men thanks to his belief in engineering a perfect race of superhumans. We saw his name pop up over in the Fox franchise, but never got to see that pay off. But with his introduction in the MCU, he could finally finally make his long-awaited debut. The thing I'm wondering is whether Mr. Sinister is a one-movie type of baddie or a franchise villain. He's powerful enough where it could go either way. He's both a brainy and a brawny villain thanks to his genetic upgrades and could cause a ton of trouble for our favorite mutants. The Maestro is an evil future version of the Hulk, and I think his introduction is the exact thing the Hulk storyline in the MCU needs right now. Yes, this is the part of the video where I lament the fact that Bruce Banner and Hulk have been underutilized and mistreated in the MCU. I know, I do this a lot, but you know what would stop all my complaining? Maestro. Think of what Maestro could do for Hulk's arc in the MCU. Besides that one freakout in Age of Ultron, we haven't really gotten to showcase the destructive powers that Hulk can unleash upon the world. And with Maestro, it allows the MCU to have its cake and eat it too. By introducing a future evil version of the Hulk, we can see a version of the character unleash his true potential and showcase just how terrifying he can really be while all the heroes struggle to stop him. But do so in a way that doesn't make a villain out of our Bruce Banner and Hulk. They could even tweak it by saying Maestro comes from a different universe compared to an alternate future and have that fit in with the whole multiverse vibe the MCU is going for right now. At the end of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, we got a classic post-credit sequel tease that hinted that the mysterious origin of the rings would be the basis for the next film. Comic fans know that the rings originally came from the McLuhans, a dragon-like alien race, and arguably the most famous McLuhan is Fin Fang Foom. Now, normally Fin Fang Foom is an Iron Man villain, but it wouldn't be hard to tweak the backstory to have the villain repurposed into a Shang-Chi antagonist. Shang-Chi is used to fighting big dragon-like creatures now, so it makes sense. The character just fits much easier into Shang-Chi's current character arc than anything to do with Iron Man. Can you imagine if Iron Man 2 had Tony fighting a big dragon alien? That would have been weird. I mean, I guess it would have been a better version of Iron Man 2 compared to the one we got though, so I guess that wouldn't be all bad. But anyways, tying a Fin Fang Foom into Shang-Chi's quest to understand the Ten Rings makes the most sense. Magus is an evil future version of Adam Warlock, a character who's set to make his debut in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. You really can't have Adam Warlock without Magus. It's a huge element in what makes the character interesting, but the real question is, just how will the franchise incorporate Magus? Will they ignore him completely? Will they build up Adam Warlock's character across multiple movies and then reveal his evil future version of himself? Or will we get Magus almost right away and he'll be the main villain of Guardians 3? It's also tough because the new version of Adam Warlock will have his backstory tweaked since he's now a creation of Aisha and the Sovereign. There's a lot of options, but really it all comes back to making Adam Warlock an important character. It was weird seeing the Infinity War arc play out without Adam at its center, as he was vital to it in the comics, but I understand why things worked out that way. Now that the Infinity Saga is complete, how could Adam and Magus shake things up in the MCU? I know this list is about powerful villains, but I still wanted to give Bullseye a special shout out. Because yes, Bullseye up against almost anyone else on this list would be a pretty one-sided fight, but he's still one of the best street-level antagonists around. He's the man that can hit anything with anything. And overall, there's a big question of whether they would bring the Netflix version of the character back after we just saw the returns of Charlie Cox's Daredevil and Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. Season 3 of Daredevil had the massive cliffhanger with the character undergoing that experimental treatment to fix his shattered spine and coming out of it enhanced, so it would be weird if the MCU just dropped in a new version of the character to fight Charlie Cox's Daredevil. And the great thing about the character is that he could fight a bunch of different heroes. Yes, he's a perfect Daredevil antagonist, but he could also go up against Echo in her upcoming show, against Spider-Man if he's more street level now, Yelena if the two cross paths, or even against Moon Knight down the line.
Alright, time out!
See, Bullseye is an all-purpose villain, so let's start using him. The Lord of the Negative Zone deserves a live-action debut. Annihilus is a conqueror and a tyrant who just wants to live long enough to see Morbius 2 come out, which is code for saying he's going to be waiting a very long time. As mentioned, he rules over the Negative Zone, and he's always looking over at our normal universe with envy and hate. There's the famous comic storyline called Annihilation, which sees Annihilus cross over to our world with a whole Palpatine-level amount of warships to basically wipe out everything. It's a massive battle, and if the MCU could make an Avengers movie out of it, then that'd be pretty cool. Like, let's say Kang the Conqueror is the new Thanos-level overarching big bad for the next few phases. Well, the individual phases need to end on big villains, right? That's where Annihilus and the Annihilation storyline can come into play. It would be a way to unite both the cosmic side and the Earthbound Avengers into another huge fight. We know Blade is coming soon to the MCU, and it would be weird if we didn't see any vampires come along with him. I mean, Blade is a vampire hunter. Can't really do that if there are no vampires around. And who would be the biggest, baddest vampire you could introduce in the MCU? That's right, it's Dr. Michael Morbius at your service. Just kidding, Blade would cut off Morbius's head before Morbius could even utter the words, "But what about the Sinister Six?" I'm talking about Dracula, the most famous vampire of all time. If we're getting Blade in the MCU and he's going to have a meaningful storyline, then let's get dark and spooky by introducing Dracula for him to battle with. You don't get any more powerful than Dracula from a vampire perspective. I mean, we're getting Werewolf by Night soon, we have mummies thanks to Moon Knight, why couldn't Dracula pop up? It's the best option for Blade moving forward. But I guess there's another option too. That fake meme that's always spread around where Moon Knight calls Dracula a nerd and demands money is legendary, and although that didn't happen for real, it totally should now, so make Moon Knight and Dracula meet up, please.
Are you crying? A bit.
Okay, this one is only for sentimental reasons. I want to see the Scorpion in live action. I say that because I feel like we got a bit robbed. Spider-Man Homecoming teased a Scorpion transformation with Matt Gargan teaming up with Adrian Toomes, but you can tell that plans changed.
Yeah, just roll it back to last Friday.
But that idea was disproven thanks to the Sonyverse, which stole Toomes from our timeline and placed him in a whole other universe with a dumb explanation. So now, where does that leave Scorpion? There's still a chance he shows up in Tom Holland's Spider-Man 4, but I'm not really holding my breath. I love Mangog's backstory and totally think he could fit with a new Thor movie. In the comics, Mangog is the physical manifestation of the hatred of 1 billion beings that were slaughtered by Odin back when he was a tyrant. I think that's cool. Imagine all of our collective hate for Star-Lord in the moment where he punches Thanos in the face while they're trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet off of him, and then that hate turns him into a beast that runs wild. That's basically Mangog, and he still works in the MCU. The Thor movies have loved to explore the idea of Odin's past as a bad guy coming back to haunt Thor, and this would be another way to do that. He could even factor into Thor Love and Thunder. I mean, Gore the God Butcher hates gods. Mangog is the physical manifestation of hate. It's a match made in heaven. For the last entry, I wanted to talk about a villain that's powerful enough to unite a version of the Midnight Suns. And the best option for that is Lilith, aka the mother of all demons. We know that Lilith is traditionally known as the first wife of the biblical Adam, so you know she's been around the block a bit. Normally in the comics, she's an enemy to Ghost Rider, and if the Spirit of Vengeance ever gets another solo project, then Lilith should be the big bad demon he has to face. But what I would like to see is that since she's so powerful, Ghost Rider has to recruit people like Blade, the Black Knight, and Moon Knight together in order to stop her. Featuring a big bad demon villain that's as powerful as Lilith, but maybe not as famous as Mephisto, opens the door to a supernatural and demonic side of the MCU we haven't seen before. The MCU continues to expand into full-on multiverse territory in Phase 4, and as we wait for Kang the Conqueror to shake things up and cause a little chaos, I'm already thinking about what comes next. That's right, because I love speculation, I'm going to look ahead past Phase 4 to Phase 5 to see what kind of uber-strong threats are going to challenge our beloved Avengers next. How can these dastardly villains fit within the Phase 5 story? Can they be stronger than the last overarching bad guy Thanos? Let's discuss. So before we dive into Phase 5, I should explain why certain villains won't show up prominently on this list. And the main reason is because I do think we'll see some big name baddies pop up sometime before Phase 4 wraps up. These include classic Marvel baddies like Galactus and Doctor Doom. both are prominently Fantastic Four villains, and Marvel's first family is set to star in a Phase 4 movie directed by Spider-Man director John Watts. I don't think the giant planet eater will feature prominently in that story, but I do think he'll be teased or make some type of small appearance before then, which means I can't include him on this list. Even if Galactus does become a much bigger threat in Phase 5, he's still probably being introduced in Phase 4, so sorry big guy, don't eat my planet please. And then let's talk about the Doom of it all. Dr. Doom has the potential to be an all-time great Marvel villain, but I don't know if I want him to show up in the Phase 4 Fantastic Four movie. History has taught us that in the same movie where you introduce the Fantastic Four, you shouldn't introduce Dr. Doom, because they totally whiffed it 2 out of 2 times. The 2005 Fantastic Four movie and then the 2015 Fantastic Four movie both tried to tie in Doom with the team's origins. And that sort of makes sense from a movie perspective because you need your heroes and your villains sort of linked somehow in the movies, but they ended up failing Dr. Doom each time. Is it that hard to just make him the evil dictator of his own country? I guess so. But anyways, even though I don't think Doom should necessarily be the primary antagonist of the first MCU film of the Fantastic Four, I do think he might pop up elsewhere like in Black Panther 2. Seems like the perfect place for him. And besides those two, I would think the only other major super powerful villain that could pop up in Phase 4 would be Magneto. And because I'm on the fence about that, I'm just leaving him off this list to make room for other villains. Okay, let's dive into Phase 5. Apocalypse is one of the greatest X-Men villains of all time. He's considered the world's first mutant, and overall, he's one of the most powerful villains in the universe. He's so much fun to read about, but if you've only watched the X-Men Apocalypse movie, then you probably don't have a great impression of the baddie. You're probably just thinking back and remembering how a discount Ivan Ooze stood around and used some weird powers to make his horsemen's costumes look like the sickest punk band of 2005. The only good thing about the movie version of Apocalypse is that it's super hard to tell that Oscar Isaac is buried underneath all that prosthetic makeup, so it's probably easier for him to get another gig in the Marvel family as Moon Knight, which I know some people don't like his accent, but I'm really digging what he's doing there.
Layla! Did you see that?
So maybe in an alternate universe, there's a version of X-Men Apocalypse out there that's actually really good, and Oscar Isaac was an all-time great iteration of the character, but that means probably no Moon Knight, which is a tough decision to make. Anyways, enough about the past, let's talk about the future. Apocalypse would work as a Phase 5 villain for a ton of different reasons. The obvious one is that he's insanely powerful. Thanks to the 1-2 punch of both being an ancient mutant with powers that include regeneration, superhuman strength, and energy absorption, on top of mostly being infused with ancient celestial technology as his armor, that makes him already stronger than Thanos ever was. But set aside the powers and strength for a second and think of how great of a story we could get from Apocalypse. Phase 4 can start building up our main universe and whatever the X-Men universe is going to be, and perhaps there's some friction, leading to an all-out Avengers versus X-Men fight situation early on. Maybe only one of our universes can survive this type of thing. And then if Kang is dispatched by the end of Phase 4, we can learn his demise sets up Apocalypse, who Kang has a connection with in the comics. Then Phase 5 becomes about having the X-Men forced to team up with the Avengers in order to stop this apocalyptic new threat. I think on a story basis it makes sense, on a power level it makes sense, and as a way to redeem the Apocalypse character it makes sense. That's a win-win-win. If the MCU is looking for a big comic event to adapt after Phase 4 settles into its multiverse groove, then Annihilation might be an interesting one. It centers around the villain Annihilus, who hops over from his home, aka the Negative Zone, to achieve his total domination over all things in order to extend his own life. And while that motivation seems kind of basic for a Marvel big bad, I think it works in contrast to Thanos. The Mad Titan started off as this complex individual who wanted to bring balance to the universe by wiping out half of it, and people agreed with him. They're writing that Thanos was right on urinals in the Hawkeye show after all. But in Endgame, Thanos soon revealed his true nature of just being another madman who wanted to destroy the world for himself. So if the franchise decides to go that route again, I would like for the villain to just be upfront with it this time. Annihilus is great and a major threat, so if he comes right out and says that he wants to conquer and destroy all other life forms in order to save himself, then I'll be pretty happy. But even that comes with a stipulation. Every time the villain's defeated and becomes unalive, then he's actually just reborn afterwards, which creates an interesting dilemma our heroes would have to solve. Overall, when we're looking for the next all-powerful Phase 5 villain, we need to look at Marvel events that would work well, and overall, Annihilation is a perfect phase-ending event. So I've long held the notion that at some point, the MCU should just make a massive Secret Wars type of event, and let me tell you, my idea is quite ambitious. How interesting would it be if we got to a point where an entire phase was just an adaptation of Secret Wars, which saw the powerful being known as the Beyonder transport a lot of the Avengers and other supervillains to a planet called Battleworld to fight it out? I just think this level of storytelling would make a great trilogy of films. Or if Disney is able to shell out money for a massive event series, make it a TV show with all the heroes from the movies forced to team up. This whole Secret Wars adaptation would pair up our heroes from all across the multiverse and force them to battle each other and the dastardly villains, all while the Beyonder just sits and watches it all. I like this for a few reasons. For one, it's logically a great way to get the 3 Spider-Men back together again. And 2, it would force a lot of villains to interact with one another. One thing I will knock against the MCU is that their villains all seem pretty singularly focused. They're mostly only the bad guy for that specific film, but a Secret Wars adaptation means we could see something like Red Skull forced to team up with Wenwu, or Killmonger forced to team up with Doctor Doom. It's a fun concept because bad guys working together is always a blast to watch. Plus, through multiverse shenanigans, it's easy to bring back long-deceased characters. And all this starts with the Beyonder and his crazy power level, plus a desire to interfere. I already mentioned Apocalypse as a great Phase 5 X-Men villain, but if the franchise wants people to never think about the villain again after X-Men Apocalypse, maybe another X-Men baddie can step up and take his place. The reason I would withhold Onslaught until Phase 5 is because you kinda have to set up and introduce a few other characters first, mainly Professor X and Magneto. If you take the time in Phase 4 or early Phase 5 to flesh out this iconic rivalry, then you could easily set the stage for Onslaught to be the big bad of Phase 5 by the end of it. So in the comics, Professor X and Magneto have always had a fascinating relationship, where there's often a level of respect from their differing methods, but they understood where the other is coming from. One time, though, this balance was broken when Magneto ripped out Wolverine's adamantium skeleton and Professor X snapped because of it, using his immense power as revenge to turn Magneto catatonic. But as it turns out, this created a nasty side effect where all the evil within Professor X mixed with parts of Magneto to create the psionic villain known as Onslaught. The reason I like this villain in Phase 5 is because we can build up to it thanks to the development of Charles and Eric's relationship. So when we get to Onslaught, the stakes are incredibly high. But that's all just the story idea. The more important question is, would Onslaught be a more powerful villain than Thanos? I definitely think so. He actually has both the powers of Professor X and Magneto, along with common bad guy powers like energy manipulation, super strength, and invulnerability. Just don't break his armor or else you'll be dealing with an even more powerful enemy very soon. Although not necessarily having a scary, intimidating name, an interesting villain more powerful than Thanos that Phase 5 could introduce is Michael Korvac. In the comics, Korvac is a man who secretly stole some of the power cosmic from Galactus, and that made him one of the most dangerous villains in the universe. That power cosmic is no joke. Like Thanos, Korvac just wanted to build the world into a better place, but of course his methods were too extreme. So in that way, he could be similar to the Mad Titan, but represent a much greater threat. And because his powers are so rooted in the power cosmic, you kind of need to introduce Galactus first and have him established before you go around introducing Korvac to the franchise. Maybe he's overall not interesting enough to be the franchise's big bad, but he would definitely be a major threat and someone who everyone would have to team up with to stop. Man, it would be the ultimate troll move by Marvel to wait until Phase 5 to introduce Marvel's Devil. Ever since WandaVision, we've all been making jokes that Mephisto is going to show up in the MCU, but I just don't see a big place for him yet in any Phase 4 movie. The last real shot for him to show up in Phase 4 is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But I mean, that trailer basically has Doctor Strange name drop Nightmare as possibly the big bad, and if it's not him, then Scarlet Witch would probably be the better slight antagonist over a new character like Mephisto. That means Mephisto would be better suited for Phase 5. Think about it just from a story perspective. By the time Phase 5 rolls around, we're going to be almost 20 years into this MCU franchise, and it would be nice to shake things up and reflect on the past a bit, to retcon and redo some of the previous mistakes to better suit the narrative. That's where someone like Mephisto could come in. By introducing a powerful demon like Mephisto, you could see characters rewrite the past in a way that's different than what we saw before. It would provide a totally new type of threat for our Avengers to face, and Mephisto could interact and fit into almost any MCU movie pretty perfectly. If the MCU really wanted to get a little crazy, then maybe we could get a live-action version of Spider-Verse starring Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield, and Tobey Maguire. And the only threat really capable of inciting the Spider-Verse storyline would be someone like Morlun, who has his mission to jump across all the different universes and suck the energy out of every spider totem. Morlun is definitely a powerful, dangerous threat that would take a bunch of different Spider-Men to stop. But the issue with including him might be it would bear too much similarity to what the animated Spider-Verse movies are doing. Hey, I'm of the mindset that you can never have too much Spider-Man, and I think there's a way that Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse can exist, and then we have a live-action adaptation in the MCU starring the 3 Spider-Men. But maybe that's too much for general audiences. Maybe Morlun can be a very specific villain in our universe, and our Spider-Man has to stop him before he starts jumping around the multiverse. That would be a different way to tell the story, but still highlight the danger Morlun represents. The Phoenix Force isn't necessarily a villain, it's just one of those all-powerful cosmic forces that you see in the universe, and its incredible power can cause good people to become corrupted or dangerous. If the MCU introduced the Phoenix Force, then I think that would be the ultimate mic drop move. The Fox franchise tried twice to adapt the Dark Phoenix saga, and they mostly failed both times in incredible fashion. So for the MCU to say, hold my drink, and then adapt it themselves would be amazing to see. But maybe the way to do it would be to not directly adapt Dark Phoenix right away. Maybe you build up to it by introducing the Phoenix Force in Phase 5 as this powerful entity that's headed to Earth, and no one quite knows what to do about it. In the comics, this story created an X-Men versus the Avengers storyline, as the mutants thought the Phoenix Force would come to Earth for good, while the Avengers were worried it would cause nothing but destruction. Having the Phoenix Force as the catalyst to jumpstart the battle between Avengers versus the X-Men would be a lot of fun to see overall. Alright, hear me out on this one. This video is all about introducing villains stronger than Thanos, but what if Phase 5 introduces another version of the Mad Titan that's even more powerful than the one that wreaked havoc on our world? That would be a little bit insane, right? But thanks to the multiverse now, I would say anything is possible. Because as much as I loved Thanos, I did find him relatively inconsistent. And this is the MCU's chance to fix that. In Infinity War, Thanos was this incredibly complex villain with a scarily relatable plan, and it was interesting seeing him so committed to his cause. Endgame took the wind out of the sails a little bit though. Thanos became less three-dimensional and instead devolved into just another destroy the world and wanna rule the ashes type of bad guy. And you could argue that Thanos was always like this, and it highlights just how flawed his plan was to begin with, but I still just want to see more from Thanos. I know this is a little far out there, but what if Phase 4 ends with a tease that there's another version of Thanos out there? One who is able to rebuild the universe in his image and is now an all-powerful tyrant of a universe. I mean, one has to be out there, right? And if that's the case, would he set his sights on conquering all the multiverse? At that point, we could have a villain versus villain battle, as this version of Thanos does battle with Kang the Conqueror. Come on, that sounds a little interesting, right? Lastly, I want to talk about Molecule Man. He's one of the most powerful beings in the universe and can mentally control and transform the molecules of all matter and energy. I know it sounds like a boring power, but the guy can basically control the multiverse with it. It's him who has the ability to rebuild and shape the multiverse in any way he sees fit, so it would be a smart thing to stay on his good side. Maybe bring him a cheeseburger if you ever see him? That's actually what saved Miles Morales. In the Doom Secret Wars storyline, Molecule Man helped piece back together the multiverse, and because of Miles' cheeseburger, Molecule Man made it so that Miles survived the combination of universes, and that's how he came to exist in the main timeline. I'm just saying, after we're done with all these multiverse shenanigans, the pendulum will swing back the other way, and we might erase the multiverse altogether to make one big universe. And that's where Molecule Man could come in handy in the MCU. Is he more powerful than Thanos? Absolutely.
So, are there any Spidey villains who haven't gotten a movie yet? Yes, quite a few it turns out. You gotta give the Spider-Man movies credit. By now, almost every major villain has had their time to shine on the big screen. But Spidey's rogues gallery is massive, so there's no shortage of powerful foes who have yet to make their movie debut. So let's take a look at some of them. And just to make it harder for myself, I'm not gonna count Kraven, Chameleon, or Scorpion. One is getting his own movie, and the other two have had cameos in their civil identities. You escaped my ranting this time, Michael Mando. Now, as much as I like to praise the Spider-Man films for making sure we're always seeing new villains, there is one name that keeps popping up time and time again. The Green Goblin. And believe me, I get it. The character is one of Spidey's greatest enemies, and it's hard to resist the temptation to include him when you're working with everyone's favorite wall crawler. But come on, we've seen the Green Goblin so many times, and there are other goblins who deserve the spotlight. Like the Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin started out as a corrupt fashion designer by the name of Roderick Kingsley, who made his career by stealing designs from others. When he stumbled upon Norman Osborn's hideout and all of his goblin gear, Kingsley then decided to do the exact same thing. He recolored the outfit and added a cape, and just like that, the Hobgoblin was born. Now, we might have just established that the Hobgoblin is just a cheap Green Goblin knockoff in-universe, but he actually does have a few things going for him that differentiates him from Old Green. Like his habit of brainwashing other people to take up the Hobgoblin name and take the fall if his plan should fail, like he did to many people in the comics. And remember, this includes Peter's friend Ned Leeds, who could make for a pretty interesting villain in a future MCU movie now that he no longer remembers who Peter actually is. That definitely would add some bittersweetness to the I promise to never turn evil bit from No Way Home now, wouldn't it? You know, despite being known as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, we've seen very little of Spidey's street-level heroics in movies so far. Sure, there's usually a montage of him looking out for the little guy, but soon enough he'll get into some big crisis against larger-than-life supervillains who want to get revenge on someone, blow up a major city, or some other over-the-top craziness. But in the comics, the New York underworld is crawling with colorful characters that Spidey regularly dukes it out with. These are gangsters who may not have bigger ambitions than their next payload, but who are way too much trouble for the police to handle. Whether we're talking about geriatric cyborgs like Silvermane, mass crime bosses like the Crime Master, the Big Man in the Rose, or even just muscle like Tombstone, Hammerhead, and the Enforcers, it would be kind of cool to see Spidey get involved in some supervillain turf wars. And if we count mercenaries, we can throw Silver Sable in there for the thirsty people in the audience. Oh, you know who you are. Don't deny it. Besides, some of them do have potential to be pretty big threats. Like Mr. Negative, the evil alternate personality of the altruistic Martin Lee, whose powers let him corrupt others. Set him up as the next big mob boss, let his inner demons run amok in New York City, have all the others try to fight back against him and put Spider-Man in the middle, and all of a sudden we have ourselves a super entertaining brawl. Okay, so how many was that? 1, 2, 3... Oh, 11 villains in one segment! I'm on a roll! Everybody loved Into the Spider-Verse, and rightfully so. It's a gorgeous movie, it's packed to the brim with excellent action, and it introduced many popular Spider characters to a wider audience. It also has basically nothing to do with the comic book event that inspired it, which featured a completely different antagonist, Morlun. You know that thing tough guys do in movies where they say things like, "I eat guys like you for breakfast"? Well, this guy actually does eat Spider-Man for breakfast. And lunch. And dinner. And dessert. And as a midnight snack. Morlun is part of a strange reality-hopping family of beings called the Inheritors, who feast on so-called spider totem avatars. That is to say, beings from all across the multiverse who were empowered by the goddess Neith and her great totems, and were subsequently connected to the mysterious web of life and destiny. This includes every primary Spider-Man in every reality, such as Peter himself, and puts a nice big spider-shaped target on their backs for whenever the Inheritors start feeling peckish. And believe me, you do not want these guys coming after you. Morlun and his whole family are able to boost their physical strength to crazy degrees by draining the energy of living beings, which turns them into nigh unstoppable juggernauts. The stronger the person they drain, the stronger they get, so just try and imagine what happens when they eat a couple spiders in a row. Oh, and by the way, did I mention they can fly? So yeah, any budding spider heroes out there really shouldn't underestimate Morlun and his family, even if they do kinda look like a bunch of slightly too eccentric goths on their way to an interview with a vampire screening. They might actually just straight up eat you. Many of Spider-Man's baddies are based on animals. Even if we just stick with his most famous enemies, we've got a lizard, an octopus, a vulture, a scorpion, a rhino. God, who am I forgetting?
A jackal! Jackal! It's a jackal! It looks like a jackal! 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 It's a jackal!
Oh, right. That guy. Starting his comic book career as just a college professor at Peter's school, Miles Warren developed a rather creepy obsession with his student Gwen Stacy and ended up blaming Spider-Man for her death. This then drove him mad to the point where he created a second evil personality who dubbed himself the Jackal. This new personality then built a green Jackal suit and even injected Miles' body with Jackal DNA to gain superpowers, all in order to exact his revenge on Spider-Man, which then failed horribly on multiple occasions. But the Jackal has a much bigger claim to fame than just being yet another in a long line of villains to try and kill the web-slinger. After all, he's the guy who was behind the infamous clone saga. You see, the Jackal always had a fondness of creating clones to try and mess with Peter, but things got extra complicated when one of his Peter Parker clones were revealed to have survived and got into hiding under the name Ben Reilly. This then set the stage for a years-long, ridiculously convoluted story arc that featured more clones than you can shake a stick at. Now, whether you love or hate this arc, it has continued to influence the Spider-Man mythos ever since, and given us plenty of other Spider-Man doing their own thing independent of Peter, like the aforementioned Ben Reilly and the more gruff Kane Parker, both of whom have gone by the alias of the Scarlet Spider. Knowing that Peter is about to enter college in the MCU, it seems the perfect time to introduce Gwen and Miles. And I, for one, would love to see Miles as the Jackal on the big screen, especially if it leads to the introduction of Ben or Kane. Now, since I said that I won't include villains who have made even minor appearances in the movie so far, I can't actually list Alistair Smythe, even if all he managed to do in his brief appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 2 was accidentally turning Max Dillon into Electro. But that doesn't mean I can't talk about his dad. Introduced back in 1965, back when newspaper owners made a lot of money, Spencer Smythe was a robotics expert who approached J. Jonah Jameson for funding. Realizing that Smythe's robots had the ability to track spiders, Jonah then hired Spencer to build him a Spider Slayer suit and took to chasing Spider-Man around himself. And it was terrifying. And if you're sitting there thinking that the idea of Jonah moonlighting as a supervillain sugar daddy sounds a bit unlikely, try asking McGargan where he got the Scorpion suit. Anyway, once Jonah failed to catch Spidey and blamed Smythe's machines for it, Spencer then became obsessed with defeating Spider-Man and soon began to build robots that he called Spider Slayers. Robots that I'm sure any 90s kids in the audience will fondly remember from the Spider-Man animated series. These robots caused Spidey plenty of grief throughout his career, until Spencer eventually kicked the bucket, only for his son Alistair to then take the Spider Slayer name for himself. But that's a story for another video. Introduced back in the 60s, Abner Jenkins was an aircraft mechanic who got tired of his job and built himself a suit of superpowered armor to turn to crime instead. You know, as you do in the Marvel universe when the everyday humdrum just becomes a bit too much to bear. While he started out wearing this clumsy soccer-fingered number and fighting the Fantastic Four, he soon upgraded his armor to something much more slick and took to battling Spider-Man instead, usually as a henchman or a mercenary helping out some other villains with their bigger agenda. Now, speaking of working with other baddies, Abner did actually at one point lead a supervillain team called the Sinister Syndicate. But he's probably best known for his time with the Thunderbolts, which was a group of villains disguised as new heroes led by Baron Zemo during a time when most of Marvel's heroes were assumed to be dead. Calling himself Mark I while on this team, Abner soon found the life of a hero much more rewarding than that of a low-rent bad guy, and he actually ended up fully reforming. He then became the leader of his own Thunderbolts team, which was specifically intended to give former villains a chance at a new lease on life. Not too shabby for a former aircraft mechanic, huh? Are you ready for one more insect villain? Or, like, thousands of them? Then say hello to Swarm. Despite his relative obscurity to mainstream audiences and his lack of appearances in much Spider-Man media outside of the comics, Swarm is one of the most infamously bizarre and over-the-top supervillains Marvel has to offer. But that just comes with the territory of essentially being a psychic skeleton covered in bees. To back it up a bit, the German scientist Fritz von Meyer started out working as one of the top toxicologists in the employ of a certain mustache dictator who shall go unnamed here in order to keep YouTube off my back. Managing to escape capture after World War II, Fritz then went to South Africa, where he discovered a colony of intelligent bees that had been mutated by the radiation coming from a nearby meteorite. Intrigued by this, Fritz attempted to take the queen bee for himself for study, only for the hive to violently retaliate and devour everything but his bones, which then somehow transferred his consciousness to the hive, giving him the ability to shape the bees into a new body for himself. And just like that, he then took up the name Swarm and went to New York, where he battled the champions and eventually Spider-Man, who he has gone up against many times since. So wait, you ask, if Swarm is just a bunch of bees, then how does he fight? And I mean, well, have you ever tried punching a bunch of bees? Not only is he pretty much impossible to land a hit on, he can also fly and shapeshift at will, making him a heck of an opponent. He also has psychic control of other bees within a radius of several hundreds of yards, ensuring that he will almost always be able to gather more mass. We're not likely to ever get to see Swarm in any movies anytime soon, given his questionable backstory, at least not without some massive changes. Like that time Spider-Man Maximum Venom had Miles Morales' dad Jefferson Davis arm himself with a swarm of nanotech bees. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that was a bit of a weird take. Not quite as weird as fascist psychic skeleton beehive though. Another baddie who's been around since the 60s is Frederick Myers, who was originally an Australia-born baseball pitcher who got a bit too greedy for his own good and began accepting bribes to throw his games. Once he got found out and was barred from the sport, Fred was then approached by the Secret Empire and given a set of specialized deadly boomerangs, which he then used to antagonize the Hulk, of all people. Yeah, I don't think anybody at Marvel really thought that one through. After bouncing back and forth between a few other heroes for a while, Boomerang eventually settled for being a general nuisance to Spider-Man specifically. From there, he pretty much just joined any supervillain team that would have him and went around committing robberies as often as the rest of us go grocery shopping. Now, despite what a general sleazeball Fred is, he can be surprisingly charismatic, and for the past decade or so, he's actually been very prominent in the comics. He briefly led his own hilariously ineffective Sinister Six team in the brilliant Superior Foes of Spider-Man series, and even spent some time as Peter's roommate and sidekick to Spider-Man, right until his greed got the better of him and he returned to crime. As a villain, Fred is at best a minor nuisance, but come on, don't pretend it wouldn't rock to see Spider-Man dodge exploding razor-sharp boomerangs for a scene or two. Outside of mad scientists like Dr. Octopus or the Lizard, there's a fair amount of kooky inventors knocking around in Spider-Man's rogues gallery. Like the Tinkerer, who we briefly saw working with Adrian Toomes back in Spider-Man Homecoming. But there is another inventor who people tend to forget about, and that man is Jonas Harrow. After losing his surgeon's license due to performing pretty grisly experiments on people, Jonas quickly slithered into New York's criminal underworld to continue his work. On the day he found a gangster beaten nearly to death and converted him to the metal-plated hammerhead we know and love today, Jonas found his true calling in giving people superhuman enhancements. And whether they wanted him to do so or not was an entirely different matter. Now, outside of Hammerhead, none of Jonas's creations have really joined the ranks of Spider-Man's all-time greatest foes, with his resume including such terrifying individuals as Megawatt, Will-O-the-Wisp, and the Kangaroo. But as silly as some of these enemies may sound or look, they do all pack a mean punch when they get their act together, and Jonas is not above using dirty tactics to get them to dance to his tune if he needs to. And hey, there is a lot of potential to what is essentially a supervillain arms dealer. I mean, somebody needs to pick up the slack after Toomes and his crew got arrested, right? Very few of Spidey's foes are quite as mysterious as the Black Tarantula. Arriving in New York at a time where the criminal underworld was in turmoil, the Black Tarantula quickly got into a tussle with the Rose. He then started to expand his criminal empire by allying himself with another mob boss named Don Fortunato, who demanded that Black Tarantula brought him Spider-Man's mask as proof of his loyalty. Ever the professional, Black Tarantula then went and tracked Spidey down, and gave him the beating of a lifetime. You see, Black Tarantula has a lot more going for him than just being yet another eccentric crime boss in a costume. On top of surpassing Spider-Man on a purely physical level, being both stronger and faster than him, he also possesses a powerful healing factor and even a rather devastating optic blast that makes him an absolute nightmare to fight. And he has expert fight training to back it up too. Turns out that the Black Tarantula is actually a title that has been passed down through the centuries from father to son, ever since the first Black Tarantula was trained by the hand and given a potion that granted him superpowers. This Black Tarantula, Carlos Lemuerto, is simply the current holder of the title. Another thing that separates Black Tarantula from other Spidey villains is his code of honor. He outright refused to finish Spidey off after seeing him rescue a child, even while he was getting the crap kicked out of him. And he has been known to severely punish his own gang members for attacking the helpless and donating whatever they were paid to charitable causes instead. Honestly, if he wasn't so dead set on the whole hanging around with secret crime rings thing, he would probably make a pretty awesome superhero. Ever since Steve Rogers became Captain America, there have been numerous attempts to recreate the super soldier serum that gave him his powers. And almost every single time, it's gone horribly wrong. Case in point, Adriana Soraya, the Spider Queen. As one of the first female Marines in combat during World War II, Adriana and many other soldiers were exposed to radiation, with her ending up as the only survivor, but showing absolutely no signs of developing superpowers. As the government so often does, they tried to hide their shame by sticking Adriana in an asylum, only for her to break out when she did eventually develop superpowers and go into hiding, resurfacing many years later to harass Captain America, who she blamed for her misfortune. So what kind of superpowers does Adriana have, you ask? Oh, I don't know, all of them? She has super strength, a sonic scream, telepathy, shapeshifting, mind control, You name it and she can probably do it. But if she's mad at Captain America, then why am I calling her a Spider-Man villain? Well, that would be because she turned almost all of Manhattan into spider monsters that one time. As it turns out, one of Adriana's many powers includes mutagenic saliva that she can use to activate an insect gene in people and give them Spider-Man-esque powers, before eventually mutating them into grotesque spider monsters that she can mind control, because she just didn't have enough powers already. Oh, and she also turns into a giant half-spider monster herself for good measure.
Name someone's villains who get more smashed than the Hulks. The Green Mean Fighting Machine may not have the more popular rogues gallery, especially when it comes to people like Batman and Spider-Man, but if they are going up against the Hulk, they are likely some of the most powerful. To take a punch from this jolly green giant is an impressive feat, given that most of his punches could knock over buildings. From beasts to brains, the Hulk's villains definitely know how to take him head on, or at least exploit his weaknesses. Let's take a look at some Hulk villains who have yet to appear in the MCU right now. There have been hints to several villains from the comics in the MCU, and heck, sometimes there have been full-blown appearances. However, they tend to leave out the villain part, and therefore we don't count those. One antagonist who has appeared several times throughout the MCU, just not in his full glory, is Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. Yes, I know, William Hurt played him in multiple phases of the MCU, but Thaddeus Ross in the comics is better known to some as the Red Hulk. It's even true that sometimes the Red Hulk and the not Red one work together, but all too many a times they are at odds. Ross in his Red Hulk version is one of few villains who can actually rival the strength of Bruce, and in many instances exceed it.
Don't you get it? You're old news!
William Hurt has unfortunately passed away, so it's unclear what the fate of Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross will be in the MCU, but since his first appearance, everyone has been hoping the Red Monster would appear. There is another member of the Ross family still kicking around somewhere, who has some Hulk-like background in her comic appearances as of late as well. In one way or another, especially with rumors of a Thunderbolts film in the pipeline, I hope we see the Red Hulk come out to play very soon. Another villain who's basically at cameo status in the MCU, but has yet to fully appear, is a villain known as the Leader. Samuel Stearns was a scientist who in his experiments warped the size of his head and therefore his capacity for intelligence. He is one of few Hulk villains who uses his mind instead of his fists against the hulking green giant. Now, Samuel Stearns has appeared in the MCU, way back in The Incredible Hulk, the second film in Phase 1, played by Tim Blake Nelson. He even helped Bruce try to take the gamma radiation out of his blood, and became almost obsessed with it. He then helped create perhaps the most iconic Hulk villain in Abomination. During this creation, Stearns was involved in an accident that left his head cut open, with Bruce's gamma-irradiated blood pouring in. His head slowly began to reform, and Stearns smiled at the camera and poof, that was it. That was the last we saw of Samuel Stearns in the MCU, which means he has got to still be out there. The Leader could be a powerful villain for the Hulk to take on in the coming phases, and he's had plenty of time to prep. How does the saying go? You are your own worst enemy. I always thought it was you, specifically from a dystopian future shrouded in the aftermath of a nuclear war and grown to incredible strength, are your own worst enemy. Since we're bringing in variants to be some of the greatest enemies of our heroes, for reference, see the many Doctor Stranges, why not bring in one of the Hulks that gives everybody nightmares? The Maestro is often thought of as the most evil version of the Hulk, and definitely one of the most powerful. In a dystopian future covered in gamma radiation, Bruce Banner thrived in this apocalyptic wasteland. His body absorbed the gamma radiation around him, increasing his strength tenfold, and also growing a sweet white beard. This buff uncle of a villain would be a nightmare for the Hulk to face off against in the MCU. A Secret Wars scenario that brings about a multiversal war could be the perfect place to introduce the Maestro and neutralize the muscle of the Avengers. Plus, with a name like the Maestro and all the bling, Bruce might run and hide just because he's not as cool. Beast is yet another one more or less confirmed to live in the MCU, but has yet to actually show up. On Sakaar in Thor Ragnarok, the Grandmaster had several statues built on a large tower dedicated to past champions. These included famous Marvel characters such as Beta Ray Bill and Man-Thing. However, one glorious statue displayed not one head but two in the form of the Hulk villain Beast. Beast is a double threat for sure, as one of his brains has become skilled with fighting knowledge, while the other has become skilled with, well, regular knowledge. Beast is actually an android whose heads are stacked bizarrely on top of one another. However, his android strength and incredible fighting ability allow him to go toe-to-toe with the Hulk. Not only that, but you know he's legit since he was a champion of the Grandmaster on Sakaar already. So I can't wait for two former champions to face off in the MCU. That is, unless, of course, Hulk became champion by killing... Oh no. There are plenty of heroes and villains who have mastered the manipulation of electricity, but none have a cooler name than Zax. Okay, well, Electro's pretty sweet. Storm. Zax sounds kind of lame. But, lame or not, he's found a unique way to square off with the Rage Machine. Zax is a creature of pure energy. He does not have a physical form and instead is just a face on a mass of electrical beams of light. He has the ability to concentrate, absorb, and store incredible amounts of power, and unleash it in similar ways to characters like Electro. The difference here is there's no man to punch behind the shock and awe. He's a very powerful being, and his ability to grow in size makes him an excellent foil for the Hulk.
Zax! Consume! All!
He can punch all he wants, but it's likely that Bruce's brain would have to take over to find a way to bring Zax down. Personally, I would just try making fun of his name until he gives up and goes home. Some of the coolest villains share their comic history with actual history. Loki, the god of mischief, comes directly from Norse mythology. We are seeing it unfold with the Djinn in Miss Marvel. The Wendigo is a Hulk villain who shares its lore with Canadian mythology. The Wendigo is a cursed man turned into a huge man-eating monster, reminiscent of a werewolf with white fur. The Wendigo is the curse, not the man, however, meaning that several different people have been inhabited by this curse throughout history, allowing the Wendigo to appear in any time period. This would be an interesting Hulk villain to introduce into the MCU. The Hulk is a force of nature, but the Wendigo delves into curses and witchcraft, which we have begun to explore more thoroughly in the MCU. A supernatural legend is unlike almost any other Hulk villain, posing a challenge for the Green Giant and nightmare fuel for all the kids in the MCU. Ancient leaders and commanders of armies are definitely a match for the Hulk. There's perhaps no greater example than the Roman Emperor Tyrannus. In ancient Rome, this ruthless leader found a magical fountain that gave him eternal youth. It allowed him to unlock his greatest power, time. With this new time, he perfected several facets of his villainous career. He became a master of science and created new weapons and technology that he in turn mastered. The magical fountain gave him psychic and magical abilities that he also used his time to perfect. All of this preparation really made someone who was once just a mortal man capable of going up against the Hulk. The revelation of the Eternal showed us that certain characters have been around for thousands and thousands of years. Seeing an ancient ruler like Tyrannus finally emerge to challenge the strongest Avenger could be a very cool twist to throw into the MCU. Goldbug is maybe the most one-dimensional villain on this list, but hey, if the MCU is bringing in characters like the Leaper and not making them overly ridiculous, why not give him a chance? When I say cheesy, I mean like announcing your own name when you arrive to a fight cheesy. Goldbug is just a tech wizard with poor morals and loves gold. He uses it to form suits and is capable of fighting the Hulk, though not for very long. Originally, he was actually a Luke Cage villain, but would go on to use the Hulk in his search for the city of El Dorado. He would eventually team up with the Hulk in order to fight off the larger threat in Tyrannus. Goldbug does not have much character to him, but that's what the MCU does best. If he doesn't show up as any kind of main villain, he could at least be the low-level criminal robbing Fort Knox that the Hulk put in prison long before the main title sequence even rolls. Moonstone has a long and complex history that is riddled with bad. She's been a part of various supervillain teams including the Thunderbolts and the Masters of Evil. Get it? They've mastered it. The evil. Anyway, she's even been invited to the Dark Avengers to fulfill the Miss Marvel role on the team. Dr. Carla Sofin was a psychiatrist who stole a powerful Kree gem from one of her patients, who stole it from the original Moonstone. The alien rock gives her flight, intangibility, and incredible strength, clearly as she is able to match the muscles with the Hulk. She has fought several heroes as Moonstone, including Captain America and Monica Rambeau, but no opponent quite matches her fighting prowess like the Hulk. A Captain Marvel-like figure who serves the dark side could be very good for the MCU, and having her take on the Hulk first would really cement her place as a powerhouse in the universe. With all these teams forming under our very noses, whether they be dark, young, or thunderbolty, it's very possible we get a Moonstone introduction sooner rather than later. The next Hulk villain we need to see is the Missing Link. No, Zelda, he's fine, go check the woods or something. The Missing Link, while having a wholly unoriginal name, is actually a sympathetic and interesting Hulk foe, An atomic test created a crack in the ground, and from it emerged the missing link, a centuries-old creature who had been living beneath the planet's surface. The radioactivity from the test mutated this beast into a horrifying and powerful monster, capable of doing battle with the Hulk. Their strength is fairly equal, and the two had a fight that nearly destroyed Manhattan. The missing link, however, as I said, is a sympathetic creature. Bruce does not want to hurt people, but sometimes he becomes the Hulk and loses control, in the same way that Missing Link has very little control over his power. His radioactivity is poisonous to beings surrounding him, but he does not want this to happen. He does not enjoy hurting people, but this accident that created him causes him to do so. Overall, I just want to see him in the MCU because if I see Missing Link appear from a crack in the ground, I know Mole Man can't be far behind. Don't you hate it when relationships don't work out? We've already mentioned that Betty Ross does in the comics go on to become a really mean version of the Red Hulk, but before that, Betty Ross became a villain known as Harpy. Betty was captured by MODOK and was used as a human test subject for gamma radiation experiments. These turned her into a giant green bird-like creature with wings, feathers, and talons. Her talons are said to be so sharp that they can actually pierce the Hulk's skin. She also has the ability to fire powerful beams from her hands, making her a dominating force easily capable of defeating the Hulk. I'm dying for a Betty Ross comeback, given that she's still somewhere in the MCU like Samuel Stearns. They brought back Thaddeus Ross for Civil War, and now Emil Blonsky in Shang-Chi, showing us that the MCU is finally starting to acknowledge the existence of the Incredible Hulk film. This clears a path for Betty, who could return as one of Bruce's greatest foes yet. Geez, between this and whatever's going on with Thor and Jane, they're gonna need to start a support group. You ever hear of the popular Hulk villain Glob?
Did you just call me Glob?
No, I said Glob, not Blob. How about Swamp Thing? Yeah, that's right, we have yet another straight-up ripoff from DC to Marvel, or vice versa. Truthfully though, both characters owe their designs to comic book monsters of old. Glob is literally just a mess of an amalgamation of mud, swamp slime, seaweed, and many other gross, disturbing things clumping together and forming one giant monster. This swamp monster is much less heroic than DC's Swamp Thing, as his host was an escaped criminal who drowned in radioactive material, causing his form to change into a heaping mess of a creature. See, Sandman, you don't have it so bad. Glob feels almost no pain, and large punches do not faze him, which explains why he is able to take on someone like the Hulk. His strength is definitely increased, and Bruce likely just gets frustrated when he gets tangled in Glob's vines. Overall, the MCU could definitely send Bruce on an all-expenses-paid vacation to Louisiana in the MCU, where he runs across an escaped criminal turned into a swamp creature named Glob. Oddly specific, but hey, it could happen.
So now that Thor Love and Thunder is in our rearview mirrors, it's time to forge ahead, and the question inevitably becomes, who's left for Thor to fight?
This is crazy. I don't want to hurt you.
I mean, he's already fought most of his main rogues gallery, right? Well, actually wrong. There's a ton of bad guys Thor could face in Thor 5, and today I wanted to run down some of the best options and why they make sense for Thor's current arc. Could he fight Galactus, Enchantress, an evil version of Odin? There's a lot of options. Let's get started right now.
You are an old man and a fool!
So let's start with one of the big ones, and by big, I mean literally big. Galactus is the devourer of worlds and one of the last big Marvel villains yet to be introduced in the MCU. It's unclear as of now if we'll ever get to see Galactus portrayed in all his purple glory, but it's probably likely, right? The Fantastic Four are coming, and seeing as Galactus has been one of their main villains, it would make sense to introduce him to be their antagonist. But also, with that in mind, Galactus isn't just a Fantastic Four villain. He's an everyone villain, and that's why I think it would be better for Thor to fight Galactus in some capacity first as a way to set the baddie up for more adventures in the MCU. Because the way I see it, Thor is part of the old guard of heroes.
Strongest Avenger.
Access denied.
Strongest Avenger.
Access denied.
Mostly everyone seems to have retired, passed the mantle to someone else, or died. It makes Thor the practical cornerstone of the MCU, and you can use him as a character to launch the big events. So that's why Thor encountering Galactus would make sense. Then, with Thor recognizing that Galactus is a massive galactic threat, Thor could be the one to go to Earth, recruit the Avengers team, and form a united front and a plan in order to stop the Purple Planet Eater. Or if we want to continue the threat that we've seen in the last Thor movie, it's established that most of the gods have become wrathful, selfish, and arrogant. And Love and Thunder ends with Zeus declaring that people worship heroes more than gods and wants to set things straight. Maybe the reason Galactus hasn't appeared yet, besides rights issues, is because things have been in balance, sorta, in the universe. Now that Thor has angered Zeus and will be hunted by the gods, that could awaken Galactus to even everything out. It's not perfect, and I don't know how that fits into Phase 5 and 6, but again, it just puts Galactus against one of our strongest heroes, and if Galactus could hurt Thor in some way, we would know just how strong he can be. Alright, Galactus is cool and all, but what if I want to go even bigger? What if, to really capitalize on the whole multiverse aspect of the MCU, Thor ends up fighting Black Winter? Basically, Black Winter is like Galactus, only on a much larger scale. Instead of devouring planets, Black Winter devours entire universes. This multiversal cosmic entity is the thing that ended up devouring the 6th iteration of the cosmos, which led to Galen of Ta becoming Galactus, as he was the only survivor of that universe and carried over to the next one. Now, there's a really interesting comic storyline that sees Black Winter causing trouble for our universe and for Galactus, and the two get into a fight. Galactus is wounded and winds up on Asgard, where he makes Thor his herald, and the two team up in order to stop Black Winter. Isn't that wild? And I think there's a way to work this into the MCU. So, revisiting my idea of Galactus arriving due to the events of Love and Thunder, what if Thor, rather than fighting Galactus, asks for his help at first in order to fight against gods in the next movie? It would make sense that Thor would have to team up with someone who could take on gods, and Galactus fits that bill rather well. So Galactus could help Thor with the gods, but it could result in Thor becoming Galactus's herald, and Galactus using Thor to help fight his own problem, which is the Black Winter. All of that would work in tying Thor's current films and arcs into the overall multiversal story. Plus, Thor has proven time and time again that he's one of the strongest beings in the whole universe, which means finding people who pose a threat to him are very rare.
Bring me Thanos!
A huge multiversal cosmic entity that destroys entire universes definitely feels like a big enough threat to the God of Thunder. So something that I've touched upon in the previous 2 entries but want to reiterate here is that I really hope Thor 5 continues with the theme established in Love and Thunder, that gods are awful and a huge reform of some kind needs to happen. I didn't think that was handled particularly well in Love and Thunder, but a lot of my critiques would disappear if the next movie actually acts as a continuation of that rather than putting Thor on another new adventure. And I think a way to really do that is to introduce Pericus and the Dark Gods. The Dark Gods are opposites of Asgardians, and Pericus himself is the god of power unlimited, so you know he's a big deal. Most of Pericus and his Dark Gods storylines include trying to take over Asgard, but I think Love and Thunder laid the groundwork for the group to resurface now. Thor 5 could be Thor trying to help the gods get back on track and be good again, but Pericus and his rogue group could be actively fighting against it. I like the idea of a different god being the villain of Thor 5, as it would give Thor Ragnarok, Thor Love and Thunder, and Thor 5 a really great 3-movie arc for the Thor character. Plus, with Pericus comes a group of dark gods, and that means everyone could have someone to fight. It was a little lame that Valkyrie had to stay behind in the final battle of Love and Thunder, but you have to think that it was for story reasons. It's not like Valkyrie would be the one to take down Gore. So Thor 5 could introduce a series of villains and dark gods and then make it so that Thor, Love, Valkyrie, and Korg all have someone they could fight. Or if we want to have Thor face a god, then why not Ares?
I need anything! I will end you with my bare hands!
This could actually be a better continuation of what the mid-credit scene established from Love and Thunder. So, the mid-credit scene featured Zeus talking to his son Hercules, remarkably cast with Ted Lasso's Brett Goldstein, and Hercules agreeing to hunt down Thor for his father. Now, anyone who knows Hercules in the Marvel Comics knows that yes, Hercules and Thor have a fun rivalry and have fought a lot over the years. But Hercules is actually a hero and has even been an important member of the Avengers. films. It feels like with all the history surrounding the character, it would be a little bit disappointing if he was just a one-off bad guy for the next movie. No, what would be better is if Thor 5 initially pits the Greek gods against Thor and his friends, with Hercules leading the charge. But over the course of the movie, Hercules realizes that Thor isn't the enemy that his father is making him out to be, and that Thor is actually right in that the gods need to be better and not just worry about the yearly orgy. This could lead to Hercules switching sides, making way for Ares to be the true big bad of that movie. And here's why that's so clever. Hercules and Ares are brothers, which means Thor could take part in a story where two powerful god brothers see things differently and fight it out. It could be a direct parallel to what Thor went through with Loki. Wouldn't that be a cool parallel? That's why I would love to see Ares be the bad guy in the next movie.
Loki! Turn off the Tesseract or I'll destroy it.
You can't. There is no stopping it.
Okay, I've been talking about larger-than-life entities and other gods for Thor to face, but for these next few entries, I want to go back to the series' roots. Thor seems to be at his best when he's fighting family. I mean, Loki is an all-time great MCU villain, and Hela was pretty solid. That tells me that maybe we should dig up another family member for Thor to fight. Well, in that case, let's talk about Cole Borson. Cole Borson is Odin's brother, so he's Thor's uncle. He's nicknamed the Serpent and is the god of fear. He's like all three of Odin's children rolled into one. He's great with magic like Loki, he's an excellent warrior like Thor, and he has that whole I want to conquer and rule Asgard thing that Hela liked.
Submit to me, brother. Never!
He can also turn himself into a giant serpent, so his nickname of the Serpent definitely tracks. In the comics, Borson was imprisoned for thousands of years by Odin and eventually was released and caused a ton of mayhem. There's one storyline where Odin had pardoned Cole and made him Asgard's Minister of Justice. When Jane Foster's Mighty Thor showed up, Odin tasked Cole with retrieving Mjolnir, and the Dark God took over the Destroyer's body in order to fight Jane. So I think his inclusion in Thor 5 could be relatively easy. Let's say that Zeus, in his quest to capture or eliminate Thor, releases Cole from a prison the Greek gods are holding him in, and he becomes Zeus's Asgardian advisor. He doesn't have to be the main bad guy, as his power allow him to be the secondary henchman if that's what the movie requires. Either way, he'd cause a massive headache for Team Thor. So Cole Borson is known as the Serpent and can turn into a giant snake, but he's not the only giant snake that can cause Thor pain, if you'd believe it. There's also Jormungand, aka the Midgard Serpent, and its backstory is strange to say the least.
That would be...
The Midgard Serpent. The end of all things.
The Midgard Serpent is actually Loki's son that he had with a sorceress, Angerboda, and because of both Loki and Angerboda's frost giant genetics, their children were the Jormungand Serpent and the Fenris Wolf. Since we've seen the Fenris Wolf in Thor Ragnarok, chances are that they wouldn't follow through with this plotline. But that doesn't mean you can't still have Jormungand around to cause chaos. Because when I say big snake, I mean a really big snake. At its full size, the monster could encircle an entire planet. Yeah, you think that's a big enough threat for Thor to face? What's cool about this is that there was a prophecy that stated that Thor would kill the Midgard Serpent, but the God of Thunder would die as a result of its venom. I think having this storyline in the MCU would be interesting because I think before Love and Thunder, if Thor knew he was prophesized to die, he wouldn't care. But now that he has a new daughter to take care of, he'd have to grapple with the idea of beating fate. That's a cool storyline, right? Thor has fought family before, so why don't we get a little strange with things and make Odin the big bad for Thor 5? If the fifth Thor does not want to focus on an all-out god war, then I think a more personal story would be interesting. After all, Thor specifically wanted to go on bigger, more fun adventures, so why not thrust him into chaos? So the Odin we met in the MCU is maybe a little stern, but he also seems like a kindly leader who cares for his people and Asgard. What we find out though, especially in Ragnarok, is that Odin had a long history as a tyrant and conquered the 9 realms with a ton of bloodshed and violence. Yeah, he wasn't as benevolent as we thought, and I just think there's so much of Asgard's history that's left unexplored, and we can't really learn about it now since Asgard has been reduced to a pile of space rocks. So what if Thor found himself on an adventure that sees him traveling back in time to when Odin was a tyrant and Asgardians were the most feared beings in existence? So Thor would have to face his father in an epic showdown. Maybe maybe in a fun time travel twist, Thor could be the one who helps convince Odin to not be a tyrant anymore. But that wouldn't really work with the rules that Endgame established with time travel, so how about instead Thor gets transported to a different universe where Odin is still a tyrant? I think that would not only be an excellent action-packed adventure, but also a strong character movie for Thor. Alright, so in the original Civil War comic storyline, Thor is deceased at the time, so Tony uses a strand of the Asgardian's hair to make a part clone, part cyborg version of the God of Thunder, and eventually this character goes rogue and turns evil and all that jazz. Because, you know, of course it does, Tony. Thor eventually faces this clone of himself and easily beats it. And when Thor takes his mantle back, the clone starts calling himself Ragnarok. Now, they couldn't do the exact comic storyline, but I think I found a fun way to adapt this. How hilarious would it be if Thor had to face a clone of himself, but it's a clone that acts like Thor 1 and 2 Thor, and not Thor Ragnarok and Love and Thunder Thor? It not only would be just a great gag to see Chris Hemsworth return to the Shakespearean version of the character he first started in the MCU, but also to see that version act opposite of the sillier, goofier version we have now. I think if anyone could pull that type of storyline off, it's Taika Waititi and Chris Hemsworth. So Mangog is a villain that I think should have already been introduced. Mangog is the physical manifestation of the hatred of a billion beings that Asgard ended up slaughtering in the past. So basically, he's a big rage monster. So now imagine in Thor Ragnarok, where instead of the Fenris wolf, Hela resurrected Mangog instead to be her giant creature. That way, at the end, Hulk, who is also a giant rage monster, would have had an equal enemy to fight. I mean, yeah, Fenris was cool, but I just think it would have been better for Hulk's character if he was able to fight Mangog instead. But I guess the bright side is that Mangog can now show up in Thor 5. Thor fighting people is fun, but there's something about watching Thor fight snarling, angry beasts that's exciting and thrilling. Mangog I don't think is main villain potential, but he's certainly a challenging henchman.
We're not making a dent!
Thor is a warrior and a fighter. He likes to hit things with his fists and weapons to win battles. That's a whole plot point in Love and Thunder, as how he sees himself as just a weapon to be called on in battle. And that makes the ending where he beats Gorr by mainly using words to help convince Gorr not to wipe out all the gods so poignant. I hope they continue that trend by giving Thor a different type of enemy to fight in Thor 5 that isn't just a strong fighter opponent. That's where Enchantress can come in.
Enchantress, I see that you're locked in the deepest dungeons of Asgard.
She's a character that uses her magic to seduce creatures into doing her bidding, and that's a whole new type of dangerous threat for Thor to face. That doesn't have a solution, you can just punch. The only issue really is that Enchantress's design seems very similar to Hela, so the character would have to go through a radical shift. But hey, I trust the MCU team with any changes they want to make. A fun villain that's pretty strong that we haven't seen yet is Bloodaxe. I know, what a great name. Bloodaxe is the type of villain Taika Waititi would have a lot of fun with, but I guess their backstory would have to be tweaked. In the comics, Bloodaxe was a mysterious, hulking mass of a villain that was granted powers thanks to Scourge the Executioner's magic axe. The twist of the story was that the real identity of Bloodaxe was a woman named Jackie Lucas. So it's kind of like an inverted version of the whole Mighty Thor mystery, so they can't exactly replicate that, but still have a powerful, strong villain named Bloodaxe who looks like Red Skull joined a biker gang would be a real treat to see. I think the character designs for Hela and Gorr have been excellent, and I trust that the costume team could make something wickedly sinister for Bloodaxe while fighting Thor. The great thing about Thor is that he can fit in any environment. He's a great character to travel around different planets and encounter new alien species and monsters. That's where Ulik comes in. Ulik is the most powerful rock troll who lived within the caverns of Asgard with his clan. He's fierce, he's beefy, he's big, and has gotten into a few scraps with Thor. There was even a time where he made a duplicate of Thor's hammer and fought him with it. Come on, now that's a strong villain that would be fun, right? But also, maybe Ulik doesn't have to be a Thor villain per se, because you hear giant rock troll and you know who you think of? That's right, Korg.
My name is Korg, I'm kind of like the leader in here. I'm made of rocks, as you can see, but don't let that intimidate you.
Ulik would be a great baddie for Korg to fight. They are both rock related, and it would be a true character arc for Korg since he chickened out against that online troll in Endgame. See? Character development. Do you think we could see the return of any previous villain in the Thor franchise? I feel like a Thor and Loki reunion is required sometime down the line, and maybe they could redeem Malekith and give him something interesting to do? Who knows? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching CBR.